Hi, and welcome to the SRT program here at Montgomery County Community College. My name is Howie Gordon, and today's episode of Synth You Asked is going to feature a walkthrough of the Moog One synthesizer. Now, before we get started, you might ask, what makes this thing so great? There are a number of things that makes this fantastic. First of all, it's Moog. It is pure analog circuitry, and it sounds like Moog, which is pure liquid awesome. Software does not sound like this. There are a lot of similarities between this and the Mini Moog, but one of the biggest differences is it's polyphonic. You can play chords on this. And not only is it polyphonic, it's actually what we call tritimbral. That's something I'll get into later, but basically everything you see here is one of 3 layers that can be stacked on itself. It has an incredibly powerful mod matrix, which means you can route various parts to any other parts. You can do it simply and easily and effectively. There are CV inputs and outputs to this, which means you can use control voltage devices to actually patch into the back and affect the sound, or patch out of the back. There are audio inputs, which means you can put external audio into here and manipulate it with various sections. There are also audio inserts, which means you can insert various external outboard gear into the signal path directly through channels in the back. And even with all of this, it's still incredibly easy to use. So let's get up and running. So the first thing we're going to do is just quickly get up and running. Even if you use almost none of these controls, you can get up and running and get sounds into your session very, very quickly. The most important thing we need to do is turn it on, and the power switch is the back left here. Now, when you turn it on, you will hear the fans make a lot of noise. This is going to last for about 20 to 30 seconds. After that, the startup procedure will go to something it calls the light show, which you'll see in a second. All the lights will blink. Unfortunately, it takes a few minutes to complete this cycle, but once it's done, getting up and running is very quick and easy. If you need to get up and running quickly and get sounds in a session, here's how you do it. First of all, after it's turned on, the next most important thing is to know where the volume is. The master volume is right here in the upper right corner, and they conveniently gave you a separate headphone out, which is also really a nice feature. The headphone jacks are conveniently located on the front, and there are actually 2 of them. So if you and another person want to get a sound choice happening while other people in the session are doing other things, you can easily put 2 headphones in here, and they're conveniently in the front, like I said, so that you're not losing 3 feet of cord by routing into the back. Once you have your volume, selecting sounds is super easy. We're going to refer to the main panel here. In the center console here, we have our main display. There is a really nice large multicolor display. At the top of the display are 4 soft buttons, 1, 2, 3, 4, which always correspond to whatever's printed at the top of the screen. So for instance, this says Browse Presets. That's what this button does at this moment. On the bottom of the display, we have 4 soft knobs. These are rotary encoder style knobs, which means they spin freely, and they do whatever is printed on top of each knob. Okay? And then lastly, we have the master encoder, which not only functions as a back and forth, but a selection when you hit the knob. So the easiest way to find a sound that you need is to hit the home button here. And once you're there, you'll notice that the second encoder says category. And you can shuffle through the categories of sounds and find whatever you need. For instance, if you need a bass sound, I can go to where it says bass. And then the list right above that is all the sounds that have a bass tag on them. And to select a sound, all I have to do is turn the encoder and press it, and now it's loaded. Okay, if I want a pad, all I have to do is turn the category to pad. And here are all my pad sounds. Pick one. If you don't like that one, select another one. And in a matter of minutes, you can select a sound and have it ready for your session without having to touch anything else. Now, the main panel of this is incredibly feature-rich, but you might actually recognize some of the patterns of the layout here because they do resemble the architecture of the Mini Moog. So let's take a look at that real quick. So you're probably familiar with this. This is the classic Mini Moog. This synth is one of the most famous synths in all of history for a number of reasons. Its sound is amazing, but also its layout really defined the common layout of most synthesizers that came after it. The flow of this is pretty simple. We have 3 oscillators, 1, 2, and 3. All of the output of those oscillators flow into the mixer section. The output of that then flows into the filter section. And then we have the ability with the 2 envelopes to generate envelope structures that change how the sound behaves over time. And that's a pretty simple flow that is actually replicated and expanded on in the Moog One. So like the Mini Moog, we have our oscillators here, 1, 2, and 3. In addition to straight oscillators, we have a noise generator and the ability to do ring modulation. The output of all of that feeds into the mixer section, just like the Mini Moog. We have controls for oscillator 1, 2, and 3, and then the ring mod and noise. That then feeds out to the filter section, which is right here. Similar to the Mini Moog, we have a ladder filter and much more. I'll get to that later. And then we get to control its behavior over time with our envelopes. Like the Mini Moog, we have a filter envelope and we have an amplifier envelope. Unlike the Mini Moog, we have an additional envelope for modulation purposes. That is basically, essentially, the Mini Moog layout with some expanded panels. All right, before we jump in, I'm actually going to set up an initial patch so we have something really, really basic. Okay, a basic sawtooth wave so we can see how this behaves over time. All right, much like a Mini Moog, we have our oscillator section and we have the ability to tune the waveforms by octave. Okay, and we can also do fine tuning. Okay, in addition to tuning the waveforms by octave and fine tuning, we can change the waveforms. We have your standard Moog saw wave, triangle wave, and square wave with the ability to vary the pulse width. We have a noise generator, much like the Mini Moog, except in addition to just white noise, it offers us 2 other additional flavors of noise. We have red and we have purple. So to hear that, so we have white noise, we have red noise, and we have purple noise. That can be mixed into the signal. We also have the ability to do ring modulation, which basically allows us to select whether oscillators 1 and 2 are going to ring mod each other or 2 and 3 are going to ring mod each other. Okay, the output of all of that goes into our mixer section here. And each oscillator has its own output. Oscillator 1, 2, and 3 have their own outputs. The ring modulation has its own output control, so you can control how much of the ring mod volume goes into your mix and how much of the noise generator goes into your mix. After that, these go to the filters. Now, I did say filters. This has 2 filters in it. On the right side, we have our standard Moog-style ladder filter. The Mini Moog had, or has, a 24 dB per octave low-pass ladder filter, which is what this has. Okay? With resonance. But unlike the Mini Moog, we can actually change the slope of it. You don't have to be stuck on 24 dB per octave. We can change it to 18, 12, or 6 by hitting the slope button. Also, unlike a Mini Moog, this will flip the low-pass filter into a high-pass filter. So that is the ladder filter side of the filter section. On the left side of the filter section, we actually have what's called a state variable filter, which is abbreviated SVF. And that allows us to have an additional low-pass filter, which is a different flavor from the Moog ladder filter. So it definitely sounds a little different. Also with resonance, but what you're going to notice is you're not losing your low end like the ladder filter does. But it also does high-pass filter, and it does a notch filter. So you get that nice sweeping effect in the middle, and it also does a bandpass filter. Okay? Going back to the mixer section, you'll notice that next to each knob, you have two buttons marked SVF or ladder. That gives you the option of sending the outputs of any of the three oscillators, the ring mod, and the noise to either the state variable filter, the ladder filter, or both. On the right side here, we have our envelopes. Unlike the Mini Moog, which only has a 3-stage envelope, this has your classic 4-stage ADSR envelope. Okay, so we have an envelope for our filter on top, our amp in the middle, and on the bottom we have what's called a mod or modulation envelope, which does not have any permanent destination. It can be sent to any number of other destinations. Over here we have our VCA section, which is in addition to the mixer section. And you might wonder why there is a VCA in addition to the mixer. You can think of this as the 2-bus on your mixer. So the entire output of all of this eventually will feed into the VCA section, which determines the overall output of this layer of the synth. It also gives you the ability, unlike the Mini Moog, which is completely mono, you can pan from left to right per synth layer. Below that, we have two effects sections. We have what's called the synth effect, and we have what's called the master effects. Now, each synth layer has two effect slots that can be applied to that synth layer. The master effects gets applied later in the chain to everything. More about that later. Unlike the Mini Moog, this has dedicated LFOs. On the Mini Moog, you used to have to sacrifice your oscillator 3 to do any kind of LFO style modulation. This has 4 completely separate LFOs, 1, 2, 3, and 4, with a host of waves that you can use to modify any various destinations you want to send it to, along with a rate knob. Now, that rate knob corresponds to this thing in the corner here, which is your master clock. So if you have a session that's running at a particular tempo, you can actually set the tempo of everything here via this master clock to match that BPM, and your LFOs can be synchronized with that master clock. There are a few other features that can be synchronized with the master clock. There is an arpeggiator. Again, the Mini Moog does not have that. There's also a pattern sequencer. And there are various other things such as envelopes that can actually be synced to your master clock. There is a really fun, simple, but very high entertaining chord function here, which, if I turn it on, nothing's going to happen first, because first I have to tell it what chord to play. So if I click the Learn button, play a chord, now every key you hit is going to play that chord. And then finally, for this section, we're going to look at our performance controllers here. We have your standard pitch bender, modulation wheel. We have the ability to tune the whole thing up and down by octaves. Okay. We also have portamento, or glide, as Moog tends to call it. And we have an XY pad, which actually really is an XYZ pad because it does respond to pressure as well. So you can set the X left and right, the Y up and down, and the Z for pressure. I mentioned before Tritimbral, and basically what that means is this. Everything you see here is one of 3 layers that can be activated or deactivated at any time. You'll actually see in the center panel here, we have what's called panel focus. We have Synth 1, Synth 2, or Synth 3. That means any of these 3 oscillators can actually be stacked with this Synth 2 layer with 3 more oscillators, and the Synth 3 layer with 3 more oscillators. Each layer has its own independent everything, which means all the envelopes correspond to that layer. All the arpeggiator and sequencer programming and LFO and everything you do corresponds to each layer. We can have keyboard control of each layer, which means if I hit a key, it will activate that entire synth from the keyboard. We can also have things just running in the background that are not controlled by the keys. More on that later. But what that also means is I can take this layer stack it with this layer. And I can do that yet again a third time. So that is basically what Tritimbral means. It gives you an insane amount of power. Again, everything you're looking at is one of 3 of these. It's like having 3 of these in the space of one. Let's do a deep dive on each of these sections. Before we do that, I want to point out in the right-hand corner of most of these panels, you see this little triangular button. This is actually called the More button. And what this button does is it lets you see on the display what's going on in that section. So for instance, if I go to Oscillator 1 and hit the More button, you'll actually see on the display all the pertinent information of what's going on in Oscillator 1. And it'll show you additional stuff that's not present on the panel. So there are a ton of hidden features in here that can be revealed and manipulated once you hit the More button. So let's look at this real quick. I'm just going to go to Oscillator 1. Okay. Now, of course, I showed you the octave tuning and the frequency tuning here. Okay. But let's go to the waveforms for a second. And what's very different from the Mini Moog is that these wave shapes are variable, meaning we can access the in-between states on the waves. So to change the waveform on the Mini Moog, you'll see we have a switch here where the waveforms are hard set, and we cannot access the in-between states. Over here, we can actually access the in-between states. So I have this set up for a saw wave. And what I can do with the wave angle button is actually change the angle of that wave. So we have all sorts of subtle gradations in the middle. And the same thing if I select a triangle wave. Again, can't do that on the Mini Moog. Over here, we have a mix knob, and what that does is it goes from the triangle saw state to a square state. And you can actually see on the display the saw pattern morphing into a square pattern. Also, now that we're in a square wave, we can modify the pulse width and get all those in between states. All of this can also be modulated externally from the LFOs or any other source that you want. Now, a common thing to do with synths is to activate 2 oscillators and detune them a little bit. Very common tactic, which can result in some really cool chorusing sounds. But the problem with that is, on traditional analog, you're going to find a narrow window where that chorusing is nice and subtle. But if you go high or low, that chorusing is going to become unstable and get out of whack very, very, very quickly. To combat that, Moog added another knob called beat frequency. And what that does is it allows you to separate the tuning of the waveforms by a very specific amount that is consistent up and down. So if I want that specific amount of chorus detuning, by using the beat frequency, it'll remain consistent up and down the board. Instead of being in a very narrow range where it's consistent. Another thing that they allow you to do is what's called hard syncing the oscillators. So if you look at the little graphic, you'll see that what hard syncing does is it resets the start of the second oscillator's wave to match the starting point of the first one every time you play a note. If that doesn't make any sense, it doesn't matter. It sounds cool. You don't have to understand it to appreciate how cool it sounds. Yet another thing you can't do on the Mini Moog. Okay? Again, another thing that this does that the Mini Moog does not do is gives you the ability to ring modulate. I would explain that, but it's too much fun to just listen to. So let's dive in. I'm going to go to the mixer, activate the ring modulation in it, and turn it up so we can hear it. And at this point, all I have to do is select whether I want oscillators 1 and 2 to ring mod or 2 and 3. I'll go with 1 and 2 right now. And if I change the tuning, a whole lot of chaos and fun can be had with that. Again, I can do it with 2 and 3 just by changing the source. And if it's too much, all you have to do is go here in your mixer section and turn it down. So if you want just a smattering of it, back it way off in the volume. And it can now become a nice little background item. So I'm going to turn off the oscillators for a second and just turn on the noise so we can hear that. The relaxing sound of the ocean. Okay, so we have a color button here which lets us select between our 3 various colors, white, red, and purple. Now above that is a color mix, okay, which lets you blend between either white and red and purple, or white and purple. So right now it's set for white and red. If this color mix knob is dead center at 12 o'clock, that means we're getting 50% red, 50% white. If we want all white, we turn it this way. If we want all red, we turn it that way. Or blend it to your liking. If you want a blend of red and purple, change the color to red and purple. If we want white and purple, change it to white and purple. Okay? Now above that, which is really cool, is that it gives you its own dedicated envelope. It's not very sophisticated, but it's all you really need. We have a dedicated attack time and release time and a sustain on and off. So if you want this to sustain the whole time while you're holding a pad, it'll stay on the whole time. Otherwise, you can just use it to attack the beginning of the sound, or adjust its release. So for instance, okay, if I wanted a little noise in that and I wanted it to last the whole time, we hit the sustain button, and it's there the whole time. If I only want it at the beginning, turn off the sustain. Okay, this is completely independent of the other envelopes. Let's go to the filter section, and once again, let's hit the More button so we can see what's going on. Now, as I said earlier, we have 2 filters. We have our classic ladder filter and we have our state variable filter. There's a couple of differences between them, but I want to point out something here. In the middle of this, we have a mix knob, and if you can see the screen, right now, we have our mix knob dead center, which means we're 50% the state variable and 50% the ladder. If I want only the ladder, I can turn it this way. And you can see that the ladder grows in size while the SVF shrinks. Same thing the other direction. Okay, so I can actually control the blend of the 2 filters. Okay, I can also decide whether I want these to run in parallel or in serial. Now, a couple of differences between these 2. First of all, let's go to the low-pass filter, the ladder filter. It's a classic Moog-style filter. It sounds just like the Mini Moog. Okay, classic style ladder filter. Now, with resonance, you'll start to lose a little bit of low end, but you'll get that classic mini Moog sound. But another thing that this will do that the state variable doesn't do it will self-oscillate. So if you want to do R2-D2, you can get into all those types of sounds where you will actually drive the filter so hard that it will become an oscillator in itself. Now, that's one of the main differences between the ladder and the state variable when it comes to low pass. This will not self-oscillate, but what you are not going to do on this side is lose low end when you crank the resonance. Okay? Now, I said 2 filters, but that's actually not entirely accurate, because if we look in this panel, you'll see something here that says SVF spacing. And what that does is it takes the state variable filter and splits it into 2. So if we take this knob here and start moving it, you'll actually see that now we have 2 peaks in the low end. Okay, and we can space it that way, or we can go in the other direction. We can split it into a notch. We can split it into a bandpass. So now we have 2 bandpass filters. And again, we can control the spacing. We can have them real close or really, really far apart. Okay? We also have the ability to link the 2 cutoffs. So if I want a low pass here and a notch here, and I don't want to have to move 2 cutoffs, hit this button, and now either knob I move, it'll move both cutoffs in tandem. We also have the ability to modulate the cutoff, but I will get back to that in a second. Let's go to our filter envelope and our amp envelope. And if we hit the More button, what you'll notice is a couple of interesting features. Not only is this a normal ADSR, but it actually has the ability to delay the start time. And what that allows you to do is, if you, let's say you have a pad here on Synth 1 and a different pad on Synth 2, if you want Synth 2 to come in and enter after Synth 1, you can actually set the delay time here where it pushes it back. Okay, so I'm not going to do a super deep dive on this, but know that there are various things that you can do within the envelopes that are beyond just your simple ADSR. You can also, if you want to, have your envelopes tempo synced. All you have to do is set the sync button to on, and then you'll notice that now the times go from milliseconds to various subdivisions of the beat. So 32nd note, 16th note, 8th note, quarter note, half note. Okay, so all of this stuff now, instead of being millisecond based, is now tempo based. We are at the LFO section here. There are 4 dedicated LFOs, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each of them have its own independent rate knob and a waveform selector, which lets us select from triangle waves to square waves to saws to sample and hold random waves. Now, underneath the oscillator section, you'll actually notice that there are a couple of hardwired LFO routings here, which are handy dandy because they are just always there and can be used in a pinch without having to actually modulate, without having to route anything. So right here, the LFO 1 is hardwired to pitch modulation. So if we need to modulate the pitch, that's there. LFO 3 is hardwired to the wave angle. And again, this is across all 3. Okay? And we have also the ability to have LFO 3 hardwired here to the pulse width. So if we have this on a square wave, Let's turn off all but this one. Okay, so those are there all the time if you need them. You can disconnect them, okay? Now, otherwise, these are basically routable anywhere you want. And how to route something is very, very simple on the Moog One. You'll notice in the bottom right corner of several of these sections, there is a button marked Dest for destination. So let's say if I wanted to take LFO2 and route it to our filter cutoff, all I have to do is hold this in, go to our filter cutoff, and our filter cutoff now becomes the amount that this LFO2 is going to be affecting it. Okay, that can be modified or removed very, very easily. But again, all you have to do is hold the destination button, turn the knob where you want it to go, and voila, you are done. Routing made simple. Once again, these LFOs can also be tempo synced to your master clock. And all we have to do is go here in the More button, and you'll see now we have 3 rows. Okay, now the top row is lit up, and that's what these soft knobs are going to be governing. Underneath that, you'll see where it says Sync. Well, how do I get there? Simple. Turn the master encoder. It's going to select your rows for you. And once you get on the row you want, now I can turn Sync on. And I can say I want this LFO to be 1/8 notes or 16th notes or whatever subdivision of the beat you want based on the tempo you set. So beat sync and routing made very, very easy. And again, I can route this to any destination of my choosing just by holding the destination button, turning the knob I want, and you're done. Now, another really, really cool feature is what's called the variation. And again, we press the More button, and you'll see if I cycle through the waves, we have your standard triangle, standard square, standard downsaw, and standard sample and hold. And you might think, okay, well, this only comes with 4 waveforms. Not so. If we go to our waveform variation, I have it set for triangle, and I start moving the variation, you'll notice that this goes from a simple triangle to a sine wave. All the hard angles get curved, okay? And each wave has a variation. I can go to my square, change the pulse width of the square with the variation knob, so. Okay, so dead center, we have 50% up and 50% down. Okay, so I can change the square, I can change the saw. Okay, you'll see it changes its angle, and the random changes this from being a simple sample and hold to making it even more random along the way and injecting more chaos. So always hit the More button because there's always more. All right, so let's go to our master clock. I'm going to hit the More button so we can see it on the screen. Default patch is 120 BPM. So simple. I can either use this knob, and you'll see it's changing the tempo, okay? And you'll see that we have these little gradations of not only just solid integers, but we have decimal places here. So we have 142.4 BPM. Now, if you're wondering how to get that more easily to just be a nice round number here, all you have to do is hit, move the knob till you're in the ballpark, and then you have a plus and minus button. And as soon as you hit those, it rounds it off to a nice round integer. So let's say if I wanted 175 BPM, I move the knob, it's 175.4. All I have to do is hit the minus button, we're 175 even. So pretty simple. And again, that sets the clock for anything that's tempo synced, whether it's the LFOs, the arpeggiator, the sequencer, envelopes, what have you. Now, there is also a handy dandy tap tempo feature. So if you don't quite know what the tempo is, I can just tap tempo and set it according to that. Okay? Now, let's look at two things that are affected by this. One is the arpeggiator. Very cool, very fun. I'm just going to turn it on, and any chord I hold down. Okay, now, it has most of the standard arpeggiator controls you would expect. There's a rate. There is how many octaves it's going to be in. So if it's marked as 1 octave, okay. If I hit 2 octaves, okay. So it has a range of up to 4 octaves. I can have its range affected by this direction button. Now, this is not what you normally would associate a direction button to be. Basically, what this direction button governs is its behavior when it's moving in multiple octaves. So if I have this set for 2 octaves, you'll see it's continuously up. I can go down. So now its second octave is down an octave. We also have a pattern button which governs the order of the notes. So if it's set for up, okay, now it's going down. Order plays the notes in the order that I play them on the keyboard. Random is random. Every time it cycles, it's random. Okay? Now, as a typical arpeggiator would have, we have this pendulum button, which makes it go back and forth, okay? And lastly, if I hit the More button, you'll notice that we have all sorts of other options, okay? We can unsync it if we don't want it to be synced. We can change the rhythm from straight to dotted to triplets. We can change the gate length. We can have it pendulum once and stop. We can have it pendulum repeat and keep going. There's all sorts of options. And remember, to get to the other rows, we just move the master encoder to the row we want, and then these 4 knobs govern whatever is on there. Let's move on to the sequencer control. This works like the matrix pattern sequencer in Reason or any other generic pattern sequencer. If I turn it on, it's not going to do anything right away, because we haven't programmed it yet. So basically, you'll look and we have 16 steps. Now, this is 16 steps with 4 pages, so it's up to 64 steps, okay? I'm just going to do a 16-step sequence just to be simple. We have a rewind to the beginning button, we have a play pause, and we have a record button. And then this allows us to advance back and forth throughout the steps. We can rest, we can put a tie in there, okay? So I'm going to go back to the beginning, and I'm just going to hit the record button. Yes, we can do chords. And if I hit play, okay, so now, right now, this is running independently of anything I'm playing on the keyboard. So I can just hit play and have it go. And have fun with our filters. But what I can also do is have this not run independently. I can have this triggered by me playing the keyboard. So all I have to do is hit the note trigger button. And no matter what note I hit, it just triggers it. I can also hit the transpose button. And it's going to change its pitch depending on what I hit. Now, if we hit the More button, one thing you'll notice is that what I recorded in now appears on the display, and I can tell this, well, do I want this to restart back at the beginning every time I trigger it? Sure, because right now, it's picking up wherever I left off. But if I turn this restart on trigger on, not only is it transposing, but it's starting the pattern over. So again, there are many options that are hidden in the More menu, okay? Now, what's also really, really, really cool about this is if I hit this Step Edit button, you actually get an entirely different screen here that lets us move through the steps. And you can see the different lanes here with the different notes, and all I have to do is use the row up, row down buttons to pick a note that I want. And at that point, I can then control things about the note. I can change the note, I can change its velocity, which basically corresponds to volume. Okay, I can change the gate length on a specific note, and I can also do what's called ratcheting, which means I can take a specific note and have it play 2 times in the space of that little note, 4 times, right? So I can actually split up the subdivisions. Again, More button, and use this to go up and down. All right, there is a polyphony section here, which lets us turn it into mono so that we can do things like synth leads and synth bass, okay? Or there's a really cool function here called unison. And without getting technical into how it works, what it's going to do is use available voices to double and triple the amount of active voices playing and thicken the sound. It's another way that you can get a nice chorusy sound. So if I turn unison on, now I have control of how much detune I have by this knob here. Okay, now if I turn it all the way up, it's going to be quite out of control, which is really fun for a certain type of effects. But if I want a general, you know, kind of subtle chorus, okay, and that's our polyphony section. On the bottom of the main panel, we have what's called our expression assign section, and basically what this does is it allows us to take our performance controllers, such as our mod wheel, our pad X, our pad Y, the keyboard scaling, how hard I hit the note, which is the velocity, the aftertouch, and our expression one controller, which we have mapped into this expression pedal here, and I'm going to use that one. And let's say I want to have the pedal correspond to filter. Okay? So all I have to do is hold down expression, turn the filter, and now I am controlling all of that with my foot, so I don't have to take my hands off the keys to turn a knob. Okay, I could do the same thing with our modulation wheel. Okay, I can decide, maybe I want that to go to the frequency of this. Okay, very simple, very mappable. Again, all you have to do is hold down the controller you want, wiggle the destination knob, and you are all set. So with our destinations, we actually have a central screen where we can control all of those routings. And typically what that is referred to is a mod matrix or modulation matrix. Now, again, to map something, let's say I want LFO4 here to go to the filter, all I have to do is hold down the destination button, wiggle the filter, and now that's mapped. But how do we control that? Well, on the main panel we have a button called Mod. And if we hit that, what we see on the screen is a list of the modulations that are entered in on this patch. and I can scroll through them with the main encoder. And basically there are 4 sections to this. We have source, we have controller, we have transform, and we have destination. Let's go to the outer 2 first because they're the easiest to understand. Source and destination. Source is what's doing the modulating, destination is what's being modulated. And on each one I can scroll to the one I want. And there are 2 rows within that, and all I have to do is tap the main encoder to go from the top row of that to the bottom row. And now the encoders here control whatever is being highlighted. I can change the source just by moving this knob, and I can change its destination by moving this knob. Now, if I hit the bottom row, now you'll see this is the amount, okay? And I can control how much. If I want to change my mind as to how much it's being modulated, we just control the amount with this encoder here. Right now, this LFO4 is going to oscillator 1. I can also then scroll through a list of possible options within the destination here through this list. Okay? Now, if I want a performance controller in the mix here, all I have to do is go to controller, and assign that and add that to how LFO4 is affecting that oscillator frequency. All right, last but not least, let's go to our effects settings. There are 2 components to the effects. We have the synth effects and we have the master effects. Now, the synth effects correspond to which synth is active here. This is the whole tritimbral thing, whether it's synth 1, synth 2, or synth 3. Okay, so I'm going to hit the more. And then what we get into is we get to select our effect type. Okay, so if we select our effect type, right now we have a ping-pong delay, which is going to go left and right in our stereo field. We can change this to a bucket brigade or BBD delay. Okay, we have tape delays. We have flangers, we have stereo flangers, we have all sorts of effects to choose from. We have choruses, ensembles, we have 6 and 12 stage phasers, we have bit crushers, and we have vocoders, okay? All of that can be assigned on a per synth basis. So I can have synth 1 have a bucket brigade delay, synth 2 have a phaser, and synth 3 have a chorus, okay? To navigate your way through this, basically, all we have to do is click on effect type, and then we can change the type, okay? Let's say I want a 12-stage phaser. We select it. Now we can roll through presets, okay? If I want to go back, all I have to do is hit the back button, okay? Also, we have 2 basically assignable knobs here, Control 1 and Control 2, and you can control what they do based on these assigns here. So you'll see Control 1 assigned, Control 2 assigned. Maybe I want 1 to be mix, 2 to be feedback. Maybe I don't want 2 to be feedback. Maybe 2 should be the gain, or the time for the left tap, or the time for the right tap. All that can be assigned here, okay? The master effects are furnished by Eventide and sound fantastic. These effects are shared with all 3 synths. So you can put your individual phasers or choruses or delays on a synth-by-synth basis and then use the master effects for something like reverb. So if we hit effect type, we have the Eventide or Eventide plate, shimmer, black hole. Let's go with the black hole. And I can pick a preset. And have a really, really nice, lush reverb tail, okay? Both effects have an on and off button if you want to kill them so that you don't have to listen to them if you're doing something else. Okay, I can turn the master effects on, I can turn them off, I can turn the synth effects on and off. Okay, and on the master effects we have 2 sends. Typically if this is in stereo, you're probably just going to be using send 1. Okay, but if we break this out into dual mono, then the whole send 1, send 2 thing will be active. But typically, if this is running in stereo, pretty much you're mostly going to be using send 1. So I've talked about this whole tritimbral thing, and basically one of the things that can be done with this is the panel focus here activates which synth is going to be governed by all these knobs and buttons. So right now synth 1 is up. So if I move any of these knobs, it's going to be governing synth 1. If I turn synth 2 focus on, it'll activate all the knobs will govern synth 2, and same thing goes with synth 3. What if I want to change the cutoff of synth 1 and synth 2 at the same time? Well, all I have to do is hold down 1 and 2, and now this cutoff is going to govern both the synths. So you can hold down 2 of these at a time. I can hold down all 3 at a time. And now all these knobs control all 3 synths. Or I can do this on a page-by-page or a synth-by-synth basis. Okay? So one of the things that's kind of fun with that is if I have this sequencer, okay, so now what I'm going to do is go to synth 2. Okay? So basically what I can do is go to synth 1, run the sequencer there, Thanks for joining us. If you want more information, visit mc3.edu/SRT.